At 6, my mom abandoned me because I'm autistic and ran off with her lover. My dad raised me alone for 11 years. At 17, I built an app worth $780,000. Then she came back with a lawyer demanding my money. Our lawyer said we might lose, but he didn't know I'd been preparing for this. Sup, Reddit. My name's Billy, 18 male, and I'm finally ready to share my story. So strap in and grab some snacks. The fluorescent lights in the courthouse were doing that annoying flicker thing. Our lawyer was explaining that we might lose the case. My dad, Scott, sat next to me looking like someone had punched him in the stomach. His hands were shaking. I'd never seen his hands shake before. Not when he worked double shifts at the hospital. Not when the furnace died in January, and we slept in the living room next to the space heater for a week. Not once in 11 years of doing everything alone. But now they were shaking because a woman who couldn't pick me out of a lineup was trying to destroy what I had built. Our lawyer, this tired-looking guy named Brian, spread his hands on the table. He told us the scary part wasn't custody. It was that I was still a minor, and she was trying to get control over the trust until I turned 18. He said biological mother making claims about her child's assets. Judges don't always see through that stuff. I watched my dad's face go pale. Watched 11 years of exhaustion and sacrifice flash across his eyes in about 3 seconds. So I leaned over and told him to let her talk. He looked at me like I'd lost my mind. I said it again. Just let her talk. Let her attorney talk. Don't react. Just wait. Brian raised an eyebrow. Kid might actually have something here. My dad didn't get it. That was okay. He didn't need to get it. He just needed to trust me. See, here's what nobody in that room knew except me. I'd been building a case file since I was 9 years old. Every birthday she missed. Every phone call she never made. Every single piece of evidence that proved Camille was exactly who I knew her to be. But to understand how we got here, you need to know what happened since the night she left. October 23rd, 2013. I was 6 years old, sitting at the kitchen table in our house on Birch Lane, tracing the squares on the tablecloth with my finger. 1, 2, 3, 4. It helped when things got loud inside my head. My dad had just gotten home from work. He did maintenance at Riverside General Hospital. Pipes, electrical, whatever needed fixing. He always smelled like bleach and metal when he came through the door. That night his boots were wet from the rain, and he looked tired enough to fall over. The kitchen was warm. Steam rising from a pot on the stove that nobody was watching. Radio playing low in the corner. Everything looked normal except for the way my mother was standing. Too still. Too put together. Like she was posing for a photograph nobody was taking. My mother stood at the counter with her purse on her shoulder. Her hair was curled. Her makeup was done. She looked like she was going somewhere nice. Then I saw the suitcase by the back door. I didn't understand what it meant at first. I thought maybe she was going on a trip, grandma's house or something. But her face was too stiff, and there was something in the way she wouldn't look at me, like I was already gone. My dad asked what was going on. His voice had that careful edge to it. She said she couldn't do this anymore. My dad laughed, just once, confused. He asked what she was talking about. She turned around then, and I saw her eyes. They were dry. No tears. She said my name. Said I needed more than she could give. That she wasn't cut out for this. That the autism thing, the diagnosis we'd just gotten 3 months earlier, it was too much. She hadn't signed up for a broken kid. Those were her exact words. A broken kid. I remember because I stopped tracing squares when she said it. Just froze. My dad's face changed. Something shut down behind his eyes. He asked if she was seriously leaving her own son because of a diagnosis. She said she was leaving to save herself, that she was still young, 28. She had her whole life ahead of her, and she wasn't going to spend it in waiting rooms and special education meetings. She said it like those things were a prison sentence, instead of just being a parent. I heard a car idling in the alley behind our fence, headlights through the back window. Someone was waiting for her. She had a getaway driver. My dad heard it too. He asked who was out there. She grabbed her suitcase handle. Said it didn't matter. Said she'd be in touch. Said things would be better this way. That I'd adjust. That kids are resilient. She walked past the table. Kissed the top of my head like I was a houseplant she was leaving for someone else to water. Then she walked out the back door. The cold air came in when she opened it. I remember the smell. Rain and dead leaves and exhaust from the car. Her escape route. Paid for with walking out on her kid. The radio was playing some country song. The pot on the stove started boiling over. Nobody moved to turn it off. My dad stood there for a long time. I could hear him breathing. Heavy. Rough. His hands were clenched at his sides like he wanted to hit something. Then he pulled out the chair next to me and sat down. I don't know what's going to happen, he said. But I'm here. I'm not going anywhere. I nodded. Started tracing squares again. The car in the alley pulled away. I heard the splash of tires through a puddle. And that was it. That was the night my mother left, because her 6-year-old was too inconvenient. Here's the thing, though. Even at 6, some part of me understood what had just happened. Some part of me knew I was going to see her again someday. My dad turned off the stove. The spaghetti was ruined. We ordered pizza instead. Sat on the couch and watched cartoons until I fell asleep. He carried me to bed and I pretended not to hear him crying in the kitchen afterward. That was the first night of the next 11 years. The next 11 years were basically just us surviving. My dad figured out my routines through trial and error. Which foods I could handle. Which sounds made my brain feel like it was getting crushed. Which stores were safe at which times of day. He kept a notebook, wrote everything down. The first year was the hardest. My dad worked double shifts at the hospital to cover the bills that used to get split 2 ways. He'd come home exhausted, cook dinner, help me with homework, and then crash on the couch for 4 hours before doing it all again. I don't know when he slept. He learned to do everything she used to do. Laundry, groceries, parent-teacher conferences, doctor's appointments, all of it, on top of 50-hour work weeks, and nobody to back him up. I remember him falling asleep at the kitchen table once, his head on a stack of medical bills. I was 7. I didn't understand what the papers meant, but I understood that my dad was tired in a way that sleep couldn't fix. He never complained, never made me feel like any of it was my fault. There was this one time, about 4 months after she left, when I had a complete meltdown in a pharmacy. Full system crash. Couldn't move, couldn't speak, just stood there in the fluorescent nightmare of aisle 7 while people stared at us like we were some kind of freak show. The lights were buzzing at a frequency that felt like needles in my brain. Some kid was screaming 3 aisles over. The intercom kept making announcements. Everything was too much, all at once, and my body just stopped doing what I told it to. Some guy in line behind us muttered something about discipline, about how kids these days just needed consequences. Said it loud enough for my dad to hear. My dad turned around slowly. Didn't say a word. Just looked at the guy until he suddenly found the magazine rack super interesting. Then my dad guided me outside with his hand on my shoulder, not pulling, just there. And we sat in the parking lot for almost an hour until I could breathe again. We sat on the cold concrete behind his truck. He didn't rush me, just sat there, patient, while I came back to myself piece by piece. When I could finally talk again, I apologized. "Don't ever apologize," he said. "We'll figure it out together." That's the kind of guy Scott Holloway is. He never complained. Not once. Never made me feel like a burden even when I definitely was one. Never blamed me for her leaving, even though we both knew that's what it was about. School was a mess. I was smart enough to skip 2 grades, but socially awkward enough to know that would be a disaster. So I stayed where I was, learned to mask, learned to survive, learned to make myself small when the world got too big. Teachers were hit or miss. Some of them got it. Some of them thought I was being difficult on purpose. There was this one substitute in 4th grade who yelled at me for not making eye contact when she talked to me. Said it was disrespectful. Said I needed to look at people when they spoke to me. I tried to explain I couldn't, but she just yelled louder. My dad showed up at the school the next day, had a conversation with the principal. I don't know what he said, but that substitute never came back to our classroom. My one real friend was this kid named Theo. He lived 3 streets over and his family ran an appliance repair shop downtown. Theo was 2 years older than me, built like a fire hydrant, and had absolutely no filter between his brain and his mouth. He said what he thought, did what he wanted, and didn't care what anyone else thought about it. We met because his little sister was in my class, and he used to walk her home. One day some 8th graders decided I looked like an easy target. 3 of them. They had me cornered behind the gym, saying the usual stuff about how I was weird, how I walked funny, how I talked like a robot. One of them shoved me into the brick wall. Then Theo came around the corner looking for his sister. He didn't ask questions, didn't hesitate, just walked straight into the middle of it and asked the biggest kid if he wanted to find out how fast Theo could make him regret his life choices. The biggest kid laughed, said Theo was outnumbered. Theo shrugged, said numbers don't matter when you're willing to get hurt, said he'd already been suspended twice for fighting and didn't mind making it 3. The 8th graders suddenly remembered they had somewhere else to be. After that, Theo kind of adopted me. Not in a pity way. More like he'd found a weird stray cat and decided it was his problem now. He'd come over after school, sit in my room while I worked on code, and talk about nothing in particular. He never seemed bothered by my silences or my stimming or any of the stuff that made other people uncomfortable. He had this way of just being around, Most people wanted something when they hung out with you. Attention, conversation, entertainment. Theo just wanted company. He'd scroll through his phone, comment on random stuff, eat whatever snacks we had in the kitchen. Sometimes we'd go hours without really talking, and that was fine. When I told him about my mother, about what she'd said, his jaw tightened, and he said some very creative things about where she could shove her opinions. Then he asked if I'd ever heard from her since. I told him about the rare phone calls. Maybe once every year or two. Always awkward, always short. She'd ask how I was doing. I'd say fine. She'd say that was good, and then silence until one of us made an excuse to hang up. I told him about how the calls got shorter over time, how she stopped asking about school, how she never remembered my birthday. Theo listened to all of it. Then he said something I've never forgotten. He said people show you who they are by what they do, not what they say. And what Camille did was leave. Everything else is just noise. That's when I started keeping records. Theo's the one who gave me the app idea, actually. Not directly, but one day when I was 14, he was complaining about his dad's inventory system at the repair shop. Said it was chaos. Said nobody could find anything. Said the whole operation would fall apart if his dad ever got hit by a bus. His dad had tried 3 different software solutions, and they all sucked because they weren't designed for how repair shops actually worked. And something clicked in my head. I started thinking about systems, about organization, about taking overwhelming spaces and breaking them down into manageable steps, about patterns and routines, and the way my brain worked that everyone said was a disability but actually felt like a superpower when I aimed it at the right problems. That's when I started building Meridian. Meridian started as a joke, a project I messed with late at night when I couldn't sleep, which was often. The idea was simple. Take chaotic environments, stores, schools, public transit, and break them into predictable steps. Visual schedules, sensory warnings, alternative routes when things got too overwhelming. Basically, I was building the app I wished existed when I was 6 years old, standing frozen in a pharmacy while strangers judged my father. My dad's laptop died when I was 12. Just clicked off one night and never came back on. He spent 3 hours taking it apart on the kitchen table, trying to bring it back to life with salvaged parts from the hospital's dead equipment storage. Soldered connections while I watched. Replaced capacitors he'd pulled from machines nobody wanted anymore. It didn't work. So he sold his truck, a 2004 Ford F-150. He'd had that truck since before I was born. Used it to haul everything from lumber to hospital equipment to me, countless times. When the bus was too much and I needed a way out, he sold it for $2,000 and bought me a refurbished laptop. When he handed it to me, I told him he needed the truck. I can walk, he said. You can't get back time you wasted. That's the moment I decided I was going to make this thing work. Not for me, for him. Because a guy who sells his truck so his kid can have a working computer deserves to know that giving that up meant something. I worked on Meridian for 3 years. Every night after homework. Every weekend. Every summer break when other kids were at the pool or playing video games. Theo beta tested it. His sister's friend, who had ADHD, beta tested it. A kid from my school who had anxiety so bad he couldn't go to the grocery store alone, beta tested it. The code was a mess at first. I'm self-taught, which means I made every mistake possible before figuring out what actually worked. Spent 3 months on a feature that turned out to be useless. Rewrote the entire database structure twice. But the concept was solid. Break overwhelming environments into predictable steps. Give people a map through the chaos. The first demo was a disaster. Community tech night at the library. My laptop froze halfway through the presentation. I stood there while the screen went black, feeling every eye in the room like they were drilling into me. Some lady tried to be nice about it, which somehow made it worse. I didn't touch the code for 3 weeks after that. Just sat in my room and stared at the ceiling and wondered if I was kidding myself. Maybe everyone who said I couldn't do things was right. Maybe I should just accept my limitations. Theo showed up on week 2 with a bag of chips and a stubborn look on his face. He sat on my floor and said he wasn't leaving until I stopped being an idiot. His word, not mine. We didn't talk about the demo. We just sat there for 2 hours while he scrolled through his phone, and I gradually remembered that one screw-up wasn't the end of the world. The feedback from beta testers kept me going. Real people telling me that Meridian actually helped them. That mattered more than one frozen laptop at a library event. When I was 16, I entered a small competition in Des Moines. You didn't win. But some people noticed. A special education coordinator from the Bettendorf district reached out about a school version, then a behavioral health clinic in Rock Island. Then things started moving faster than I could keep up with. My dad handled the business side because I would rather eat glass than make small talk with investors. He read contracts out loud to me while I paced around the living room, catching the parts that felt wrong, the clauses that seemed designed to screw us over. We got a lawyer, Brian. He wasn't flashy, but he was careful, and careful was what we needed. Brian reviewed every document before we signed anything, asked questions that made the investors uncomfortable, pushed back on clauses that would have screwed us 3 years down the line. The acquisition offer came 3 weeks after my 17th birthday, a company out of Minneapolis that specialized in accessibility software. They wanted Meridian, $780,000. 780 was the number. After taxes and fees and Brian's cut, it was closer to 500,000. The negotiations took 6 weeks. There was a moment halfway through when the buyers wanted to change the core functionality in ways that would have made the app worse for the people it was designed to help. I told them the deal was off if they didn't drop it. My dad looked at me like I'd lost my mind. $700,000 on the line. But I'd built Meridian for people like me. If the new owners were going to gut the parts that actually mattered, the money wasn't worth it. They dropped the demand. We closed the deal. $500,000. For an app I built on a laptop my dad bought with truck money. We put most of it in a trust. Paid off the mortgage on the Birch Lane house. Set aside money for college that I wasn't sure I'd ever use. My dad quit his second job. For the first time in 11 years, he worked 40 hours a week like a normal person. The acquisition made the local business section. Small article, but it mentioned my name. In a town like Davenport, that kind of thing gets around. Theo's dad mentioned that he'd heard someone asking about me at an industry event. Some guy who ran a repair shop chain. Craig something. I did some digging. Found out Craig Keating had married a woman named Camille 4 years ago. Holloway was her maiden name. Didn't take a genius to connect those dots. For about 6 weeks, things were quiet. My dad started sleeping more than 5 hours a night. I started thinking maybe we'd caught a break. Then the letter arrived. Camille didn't come back with an apology. She came back with an attorney. The letter was formal, and so passive-aggressive. Mrs. Camille Keating, formerly Holloway, wished to re-establish a relationship with her son and address certain financial matters related to his recent business activities. That's what I was to her. A financial matter. She'd found out about the acquisition somehow, probably through social media, probably through someone who still knew someone who knew us. Small towns are like that. News travels, especially news about money. My dad's hands were shaking when he showed me the letter. I read it twice, then handed it back. I told him I'd been expecting this. He looked at me like I'd grown a second head. I went to my room and pulled a box out of my closet. Inside was a folder. It contained 11 years of documentation. Every birthday card she didn't send. Every Christmas she didn't call. Every single piece of evidence that Camille had abandoned her autistic son and never looked back. The folder was organized by year. Each year had its own section. I'd been meticulous about it. Dates, times, duration of phone calls, exact quotes from conversations I'd memorized. But that wasn't all. When I was 9, I started keeping records. Dates and times of her rare phone calls. The things she said. The promises she broke. I wrote everything in a composition notebook at first, then transferred it to digital files later. The calls were always the same. She'd ask how I was doing in a flat voice, like checking off a to-do list. I'd say fine. She'd say good. Long silence, then she'd hang up. She'd called on my 9th birthday 3 hours late. Talked for 4 minutes. Said she'd try to visit soon, which she didn't. Said she loved me, which was the biggest lie of all. And then there was the voicemail. She left it when I was 11. My dad had been trying to reach her about school paperwork that needed both parents' signatures. She finally called back, got our answering machine. The message wasn't meant for me to hear, but I was homesick that day, and I heard everything. She said she didn't want to be contacted about paperwork or anything else, that she'd made peace with her decision, that my dad should stop calling because she wasn't interested in updates about a situation she'd moved on from. I'd saved that voicemail on 3 different devices. Backups matter when you're building a case. My dad stared at the folder, at the recordings, at the 6 years of careful documentation. Why didn't you tell me about this? Because you would have tried to protect me from it. And I didn't need protection. I needed ammunition. He sat down at the kitchen table, rubbed his face with both hands. You've been planning for this, he said. It wasn't a question. Since I was 9, I said. I knew she'd come back eventually. Theo came over that night. I told him what was happening. He sat on my bed, cracked his knuckles, and asked if I needed him to do anything sketchy. I told him no. I wanted to beat her the right way. He nodded, said he respected the long game. Then he asked what he could actually do. I told him I needed his dad's help. The repair shop, the industry connections. Theo frowned. Asked what that had to do with anything. I explained. Camille's new husband, Craig, owned a small chain of electronics repair shops across eastern Iowa. 3 locations. 3. They'd gotten married 4 years ago. He had money. She had ambition. Perfect match made in mutual greed. What Camille didn't know was that I'd been keeping tabs on Craig's business too. Not in a creepy way, more in a bored teenager with internet access and pattern recognition skills way. And I'd noticed some things. Inventory stuff that didn't add up. Customer complaints that got buried. Reviews that appeared and disappeared. The kind of stuff that definitely wasn't clean. Theo's dad knew the repair industry. He knew who was legit and who was cutting corners. I needed his insight. Theo grinned. Said his old man was going to love this. Mr. Marchetti came through 3 days later. He sat at our kitchen table with a cup of coffee and talked for 2 hours about Craig Keating's reputation. Turns out the guy was known in the industry as a corner cutter. Used cheap parts, overcharged for labor. Had a habit of declaring items unrepairable when they just needed simple fixes, then reselling them. He'd also burned some bridges. Other repair shop owners didn't like him. Suppliers were wary of him. There were rumors about warranty fraud that nobody had ever been able to prove. Everyone in the business knows this guy is shady, Mr. Marchetti said. But nobody's had the patience to put it all together. The paper trail's there. You just gotta know where to look. I told him I was very good at looking. He smiled. Said I reminded him of his son, which I took as a compliment. After Mr. Marchetti left, Theo stayed behind. We sat on the back porch while my dad watched TV inside. So what's the plan? Theo asked. Win the case and call it a day? I shook my head. The case is step 1. Step 2 comes after. What's step 2? I told him. About the patterns I'd noticed in Craig's business filings. About what happens when you give the right information to the right people. Theo was quiet for a long minute. Then he said, That's cold, man. Cold is the least of what she deserves. He nodded. All right, I'm in. I filed everything away. Not for the hearing, for after. The pre-trial conference was held in a small room at the courthouse. Camille walked in looking like she'd stepped out of a catalog. Hair perfect. Nails done. She had this soft, wounded expression on her face. Her lawyer was a slick guy named Harmon. Young. Confident. The type who practiced his concerned nods in the mirror. Craig wasn't there. Interesting. Maybe he didn't want to be tied to this. Maybe they were already having problems. Camille tried to catch my eye across the table. I looked at the wall behind her head and counted the cracks in the paint. Harmon did most of the talking. He painted a picture of a mother who'd made difficult choices, a woman who'd struggled with the overwhelming demands of caring for a special needs child, a mother who'd given her son space to grow and now wanted to be part of his success. Brian asked some basic questions. When did she last contact me? What were the circumstances? Did she attend any school events? Medical appointments? Did she know the name of my doctors? My teachers? My friends? Camille answered carefully. Said she'd kept her distance out of respect for my development, that she'd watched from afar, that her heart had always been with me even when she couldn't be there physically. I almost laughed, but I'd practiced not reacting to garbage like that. Brian nodded. Then he asked if she knew I was allergic to peanuts. Camille blinked, said she didn't remember any allergies. Brian slid a piece of paper across the table. School medical records going back to first grade. Allergy clearly documented. Multiple EpiPen prescriptions. Notes from the school nurse. Camille's smile twitched for just a second. Harmon jumped in, said this wasn't a test of medical trivia, that his client's love for her son wasn't measured in allergen awareness. Brian agreed, said he just wanted to establish baseline familiarity with my life over the past 11 years. I sat quietly through all of this. Didn't speak, didn't react, let them talk. After the conference, Camille tried to approach me in the hallway. She reached out like she was going to touch my arm. I stepped back. I know this is hard, she said. I know you're angry, but I'm your mother. That has to count for something. I looked at her for the first time, noticed the designer watch, the fresh manicure, the complete lack of anything real behind those rehearsed eyes. She was performing motherhood, probably practiced this exact speech in the mirror. It counts for exactly what you put in, I said. Nothing. Her face twitched. Just for a second. Might have been surprise, might have been her realizing that the script she'd prepared wasn't going to work on me. You don't understand, she started. I understand perfectly. You left because I was inconvenient. You came back because I'm worth money. Those are the facts. Everything else is just noise. She opened her mouth to respond, but nothing came out. Then I walked away. In the car, my dad asked if I was okay. I told him I was fine. I was more than fine. The hearing was scheduled for 3 weeks out. 3 weeks of depositions and document exchanges and legal motions. 3 weeks for Camille to convince herself she was going to win. Brian warned us it would be a grind. Said Camille's lawyer would try to delay, try to wear us down. But we didn't settle. We showed up for every meeting, filed every response on time. I used those 3 weeks well. Theo and I spent hours going through Craig Keating's business records. Public stuff mostly. BBB complaints, online reviews, business filings. We found patterns, inconsistencies. Theo's dad introduced me to a guy named Howard, who used to do accounting for small businesses before he retired. Howard took one look at Craig's publicly available financial information and shook his head. Said the numbers told a story, and the story wasn't good. I thanked him, filed everything away for later, because winning the hearing wasn't going to be enough. I wanted Camille to understand exactly what she'd thrown away. The hearing was on a Tuesday. Judge Whitcomb had gray hair pulled back tight and reading glasses she kept pushing up her nose. Craig wasn't there. Again, probably wanted distance in case it all went sideways. My dad sat next to me in his one good suit. Brian had prepped us well. Don't react. Don't interrupt. Let the evidence speak. Brian presented our case first. 11 years of single parenting. Every single piece of paper that proved my dad had been there while she hadn't. He walked the judge through the timeline. The complete and total absence of a mother from her son's life. Then it was Camille's turn. Harmon tried the sympathy angle. The overwhelming demands of raising a special needs child. A mother's difficult choice to step back so her son could thrive in a more stable environment. He used phrases like emotional support from a distance and respecting her son's need for routine. He made abandonment sound like a parenting strategy. Camille talked about her struggles, her journey, her deep desire to reconnect with her son now that he was thriving. The word thriving made my skin crawl, like I was a houseplant that had finally bloomed and now she wanted credit for the sunlight. Brian cross-examined her, asked simple questions, basic facts about my life, and she answered them all wrong. Brian let each answer hang in the air for a moment before moving on. Didn't argue with her, didn't point out the obvious. The judge's pen stopped moving. Then Brian played the voicemail. Camille's voice filled the courtroom, tinny through the old speakers, but perfectly clear, explaining that she didn't want to be contacted, that she'd made peace with her decision, that my dad should stop calling because she wasn't interested in updates about a situation she'd moved on from. I kept my eyes on her while it played. The color drained out of her cheeks. She tried to hold it together, but her hands were gripping the edge of the table hard enough to turn her knuckles white. Her lawyer objected. The judge overruled. The voicemail played to the end. Nobody said a word after that. Camille stared at the table in front of her, like she was hoping it would swallow her whole. Brian asked if I wanted to make a statement. I stood up and walked to the front of the courtroom, adjusted the microphone because it was pointing at the wrong angle. I kept it short, said I'd built Meridian because I wanted to help people like me navigate a world that wasn't designed for us. Said I'd done it with the support of one parent who never gave up, even when things were impossible. Said I didn't need or want anything from the woman who'd called me broken and walked out. I didn't look at her while I spoke. She wasn't worth the eye contact. The ruling came faster than anyone expected. Judge Whitcomb didn't even take a recess to think it over. She denied Camille's petition entirely. No custody modification, no financial control, no visitation unless I specifically requested it, which would happen approximately never. She ordered Camille to pay our legal fees, issued a formal warning about frivolous filings, made it clear that if Camille tried this again, there would be serious consequences. But then she added something that wasn't in any of the legal motions. She looked directly at Camille and said that in her 30 years on the bench, she'd seen a lot of parents make difficult choices, but she'd never seen someone try to cash in on a kid they'd abandoned. She said she hoped Camille would take some time to think about what kind of person she wanted to be. Camille sat frozen. Her perfect composure finally shattered. She looked at Harmon like she expected him to fix it. He was already packing up, probably figuring out how to get paid by a client who'd just lost everything. We walked out of the courthouse into the afternoon sun. My dad looked like he'd aged 5 years in the past 3 hours, but he was smiling. Actually smiling. I couldn't remember the last time I'd seen him smile like that. He put his hand on my shoulder and asked if I was okay. I told him I was fine, but I wasn't done. Theo was waiting by the car. He'd wanted to come inside, but I told him it would be too crowded. He leaned against the hood with his arms crossed, looking like a bouncer at a club nobody wanted to get into. "How'd it go?" he asked. I gave him a thumbs up. He grinned and opened the passenger door for my dad, then climbed in the back with me. "So," he said as we pulled out of the parking lot. "Phase 2? I nodded. The court ruling wasn't the revenge. It was step one. 3 days after the hearing, an anonymous tip landed at the Iowa Attorney General's Consumer Protection Division. Detailed documentation of warranty fraud at Craig Keating's repair shops. Customer complaints. Suspicious inventory records. Contact information for former employees who'd been waiting for someone to finally ask questions. I'd spent 3 weeks before the hearing putting that package together. All public information. All legitimate research. I just happened to be very good at connecting dots that other people missed. What happened next went exactly how you'd expect. The AG's office sent letters to customers asking for receipts. Suppliers put Craig on cash only. Then the inspection started. Customers disappeared. Locations closed. Craig and Camille separated somewhere in the middle of it all. Their marriage apparently unable to survive when the money and status dried up. I didn't track the details. Didn't need to. Theo's mom ran into Camille at a doctor's office about 8 months later. She was working as a receptionist now. Same building, different life. Designer clothes gone. Perfect nails unpolished. She'd tried to make small talk, tried to ask how I was doing. Mrs. Marchetti had smiled politely and said she didn't talk about other people's kids. She looked tired, Mrs. Marchetti told me over dinner, like life finally caught up with her. I nodded. Took another bite of pasta. Didn't feel much of anything. That's the thing about revenge. It's just math. Actions have consequences. Sometimes those consequences take 11 years to show up, but they always show up. She'd spent 11 years acting like I didn't exist. Now she was living a life where that was actually true. Meanwhile, I'm doing fine. The money from Meridian is sitting in a trust. I'm thinking about going to school, maybe studying computer science for real, maybe building something else. I've got options now. That's more than most people get. My dad picked up woodworking as a hobby, built me a desk for my room. It's crooked and the drawer sticks, but he made it with his hands and I wouldn't trade it for anything. He's sleeping better now, working normal hours. Sometimes I think about Camille. She made a choice 11 years ago, called me broken and walked out. And every day since then, I proved her wrong. If you enjoyed this video, please hit that subscribe button. It really helps the channel and help us bring you more and better stories. Thanks.